Welcome all to this fifth and last webinar of this series of management research quality across the world. I see Andrew Jack, the global education editor of the Financial Times, already with us. Welcome, Andrew. And also Carrie Brown, the president of the Australian New Zealand Academy of Management. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you and good evening.
Thank you so much for making the effort to be with us. So let me, I guess, start with the presentation. So now you should be able to see the slideshow. As I was saying, this is the fifth and closing webinar on this series that we put together since January to discuss this issue on the quality of management research. And as I said, and you might have been able to read, is triggered by the FT list survey, the Financial Times list survey on how to measure the quality and impact of management research. The agenda for today is, after this welcome and introduction by the co-chairs, David Zuga, the president of the Africa Academy of Management, and also a member of the General Assembly of IFSAM, and myself, we will have the initial speeches of the different panelists, 9, because Claudia Costin, as I said, unfortunately is not able to be with us. And hopefully, if the panelists kindly stay to their time, which we are aware that it's a bit of a challenge given the complexity of the topic, we'll have some time for verbal dialogue. Though I really encourage everyone to use the chat, which is really one of the nice things that these online interactions have brought, so that the exchange is not just limited to the verbal aspect, but you can actually write on the chat your comments, your opinions, as well as your questions. And this will be also recorded and summarized in our publication for this webinar, which will be the IFSAM conversation letter number 5. This should leave us with some time also for actually addressing some of these questions that David and I will moderate from the chat. And finally, some closing words, and in particular, mentioning again, but I'm already foreshadowing it, that the General Assembly of the Federation has already pre-approved a position statement on this topic of 5 pages, which has a 3 pages diagnosis and 2 pages of recommendations that we will soon release after this webinar, when we can include the summary of the points that the panelists will make. Just a few words about the Federation before we get started on this webinar. So the Federation, the International Federation of Scholarly Academies of Management, it's a federation which brings as members only academies of management, scholarly societies or learned societies. We currently have 20 members, which actually are quite well representing the different parts of the world. Recently, as of yesterday, we had the Mexican Academy of Management join us together with the Senegalese Academy of Management. We have also 2 observer members, the Australian and New Zealand Academy of Management, which we hope will soon become again a member. So you can see that what's the scope of the Federation and what does the Federation do? Well, just to mention briefly the mission, overall is to advance business and management research, teaching and practice across the world. Obviously, this is a very broad mission to advance these 3 domains in management, broadly understood, of all the subfields included: finance, accounting, operations, marketing, human resources, strategy, business ethics, you name it. But what are we doing more specifically? Well, today I will basically highlight one of the 7 objectives within the statutes of the Federation, which is the one that relates to today's session and the webinar series that this session concludes, which is to establish and maintain standards of competence in management research, teaching, and practice. And when we say standards, they don't have to be understood as one size fits all, but precisely the opposite, as the statutes mention, taking a contextualized perspective. So this, we could say, is the soft policy role of the Federation. And this webinar series and the position statement that we will release very soon after this webinar will be the first example of the soft policy role of the Federation at the worldwide level. So this webinar series, as I said, is designed to as a consultation process in which we provide a forum to give voice to and engage in a dialogue with the different representatives of different stakeholder groups, which are important for this issue of management research across the world, to talk about how research is defined, what are the different research publication formats which are being considered today, and what are the current systems and practice of engaging in management research quality evaluations, how well these systems are performing, and what changes, if any, should actually be undertaken. As I mentioned, this is today the last of a series of 5 in which we have had representatives from all the different stakeholder groups listed here present their views: association leaders, university presidents and school deans, editors of publishing houses, editors-in-chief of journals, governmental officers in charge of funding management research, and reflected in the conversation letters and in the position statement that I mentioned will be released soon after this webinar. Today, we want to pay attention in particular to representative of the practitioner stakeholder groups, so top managers, consultants from different sectors, and also in the panel there is one representative at least of the other stakeholder groups. So today is like the most multivocal, pluralistic configuration of the panels to try to come to a conclusion. So this is the list of participants, and I guess I will let David now take the floor. David.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, Xavier. As Xavier indicated, we have 10 presenters, and we decided earlier on an order, and the order would have us beginning with Eric, the EFMD president. After his presentation, that will be followed by Lou Fukai, and then Michael, Basile, Tomoki Sekiguchi, Ella, Rendez, Adegbesan, and Bayan Thiem, and then Andrew Jack, and closing with Marie Salles. So as you were all told, 6 minutes hopefully, but we understand the challenges. The questions that were sent to you, you can decide to focus on any 2 of those questions that you think are most relevant to you. And after that, then we would all discuss, as Michael indicated. But these were the questions that were sent to you earlier on. And on that note, I think we would begin with Eric, if possible. We'll hand it over to Eric. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I will do the 6 minutes. I've tried to pack everything together. So, well, I think that our model still favors academic outputs, loosely coupled with societal needs. There is still, in my opinion, too much disconnection of research with business practice. We are spending a lot of time and resources to write papers with sometimes unclear value to the management of organizations. Several years ago, I remember 2 Wharton professors who estimated the cost of an A paper at $400,000. And if we consider that faculty and all the associated costs, of course, represent 50% of the business school budget, with 50% of their time spent doing research, it means that 25% is the percentage we could call R&D expenses in the business school system. I know very few businesses, by the way, investing such a huge proportion of their budget in research and development. I think that mainstream research is still axiomatic, hypothetico-deductive, von Humboldt-based, so to speak. In addition, recognized research is very much discipline-based and doesn't really accept multidisciplinarity and papers dealing with it. If you add to that the research time frame can be extremely long, you may end up with rigorous but disconnected findings, forgetting the heuristic imperative of research. However, unlike 15 to 20 years ago, it seems that we are not preaching in the desert, if I can express myself this way anymore, since a number of scholars have started to advocate for major changes. The responsible research in business and management, led by Bayan Thiem, for instance, and supported by IFMD, but also AACSB and many others, is, in my opinion, a good example, stressing on service to society, stakeholder involvement, valuing both academic and applied contributions, impact, I mean, just to mention a few. I was also very happy to see that the FTA, Andrew, asked business schools to select papers that considered to have social impact, opening the way to a different kind of evaluation. Other stakeholders are also pushing for more diversity and impact assessment. At IFMD, we have integrated a transversal criterion in all our accreditations called ethics, responsibility, and sustainability that applies to research. We have also developed the business school impact system with the French Foundation for Management to assess the impact of our organizations on their ecosystems. And you discover, by the way, that some business schools, clearly not at the very top, can do an outstanding job in terms of research or teaching on their environment. I'd like to mention the case of Sobi Business School that has been praised by the Nova Scotia government for its impact in the region. Well, I mean, I could go like this forever, but we have to call a spade a spade. We are spending billions, yes, billions in research, and we have to recognize that the outputs are not groundbreaking. We need a paradigm shift now, and I think we need to reorient research towards more socially responsible outputs. I'm not saying that we should throw the baby with the bathwater, but we do need more diversity in research methodologies, research questions, and research outputs. The very first and essential move, in my opinion, is to change the structure of doctoral programs. They are built around functional schminaes and reproduce the normal science, the dominant model. And by the way, since these programs are so expensive, and you know about it, and don't really help in rankings and stuff, why don't we pool resources to create what I would call, well, doctoral Airbuses, you know, based on the Airbus model, where the basic courses could be shared to initiate economies of scale. Then, why don't we initiate a new policy to reward as well faculty being able to make the heuristic dimension of their work explicit and disseminate it? In a nutshell, we need more engaged faculty, as my friend Andrew Pettigrew calls them. An academic can occupy very different roles, and there is no first class and second class faculty. Applied research, academic books, innovation in teaching, engagement in society, mentoring students and decision makers, everything is valid and legitimate. We must have always in mind that we have, of course, a scientific mission, but a societal one as well. I mean, there was also the question of how the pandemic, because of course we must talk about the COVID-19, it's impossible to do without it, how the pandemic has changed or will change research. We saw how the development of a virus in Wuhan has generated the biggest global crisis since the Second World War. And this has made us aware of many dysfunctions that would really deserve to be researched and studied to limit the impact of the next catastrophes. This is what I call heuristic. Beyond this aspect, the dramatic situation calls for a paradigm shift in research to mirror the evolution of societies. Research has to be more agile, resilient, and versatile. Otherwise, our stakeholders will hold us responsible for not contributing enough to their global well-being. And this time, it won't be publish or perish, but publish and perish. Thank you very much. I hope I did the 6 minutes. I don't know.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. Yes,
Oh.
6 minutes and 30 seconds. That was great. I mean, a lot of valuable ideas and inputs for the conversation. So the next speaker, David, you have the list.
Sorry, what I was saying is Louis Foucault.
That's right. Lou Foucault, the president of Jiangxi University.
Right.
Professor Foucault, please.
Yeah, hello, everyone. I will try to explain my opening in Chinese, and I will ask my colleague to translate it to English. Okay. My topic is about the management research quality assessment. 管理学研究质量的评估是一个科学难题，也是一个值得研究的科学问题。
The management research evaluation remains a tough issue in scientific research, but it is a field that devours in-depth research.
因为管理学研究面临的不确定性最大，环境最复杂，研究对象最具多样性。
Faced with the greatest uncertainties, the most complex environment, and the variable of the research objects.
我想这也是我们讨论这个主题的意义之所在。
I believe our discussion is of great significance.
大概有3种途径可以对管理学研究的质量进行评估。
From my perspective, there are 3 ways to conduct the evaluation of management research.
第一个就是通过杂志的排名，
The first way is the journal rankings.
这个方法呢比较客观，因为杂志的排名是建立在一套指标的基础上，介认呢具有一定的可信度。
The advantage is objectivity, as the ranking of the journals is based on a set of metrics, and therefore the conclusion is of highly reliability.
但是并不是杂志上的每篇论文都是高质量的、创造性的。
Unfortunately, not every paper published on the journal is of high quality and innovative.
这与编辑的学术偏好和判断能力有关。
This can be accounted for the editor's academic preference and judging ability.
我们不能把学术评价的判断权完全交给杂志的编辑。
We cannot totally rely on the editor to make the academic judgments.
第二个途径是通过他人的引用来评价。
And the second way to conduct management research evaluation is citations.
这有一定的判断价值，特别是对开创性的研究或者是奠基性的研究最为明显。
This is of some judgmental value, especially for some innovative research or fundamental research.
但是呢，我们也会发现，不被人引用的论文未必就不是一项好的 高质量的研究成果。
But that does not necessarily mean those papers that are not cited by others are not good research results.
很多知名学者的论文都是在比较晚才被人们发现其价值，然后被大量的引用。
The research value is not found until very late sometimes.
第三个途径就是同行评价，
The third way lies on peer review.
这种方式呢，主观性比较强，其评价的结果取决于评价者的立场、态度、学术偏好。
This way is of great subjectivity, and the result is highly reliable on the judges' standpoints, attitudes, academic preference, and even personal interests.
如果评价者能够客观、公正、公平的评价，那么这个评价的结果是很有价值的。
If the review is made in a fair and objective way, then the conclusion is of highly reliability.
同行评价包括我们研究界的，就是学术界的同行评价，也包括来自实践的同行的评价。
Peer review includes not only reviewers from academics but also industry.
由于管理是应用性的学科，它的实践性很强，所以很多理论呢是来自实践，又要去指导实践。
Management centers a lot on applicability. Therefore, a lot of theories come from practice and then return offer guidance to practice.
如果研究的结果、研究的成果，能够被实践界的同行认可，并且在实践中加以应用的话，那么这就是个高质量的研究。
I can see if the research results can be applied to industry, to practice, then I would say it is of great value and high quality.
刚才这个 Eric 先生也提到了，管理的实践性，特别赞成这个管理研究的实践导向。
Earlier, as Professor Eric mentioned, the practicability is of great importance, and I agree with Eric.
所以我想，管理研究质量的评价还应该是多元的，不应该是单一化的。
And therefore, I believe the management research evaluation should be conducted in a multi way rather than in a single way.
现在对管理研究质量的评价也是一个大学里面很重要的工作，它关系到我们教师的职业的评价。
The management research evaluation is of great priority in our university work, and it is highly related to the development of the faculty.
我们非常希望能够得到我们协会的有价值的这个支持和帮助。
We sincerely look forward to your guidance and advice.
谢谢大家。
Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Xie, thank you so much for your contribution. We truly appreciate it. And we will, I guess, have the chance to further discuss it. I think that now the floor is to Professor Barzilai.
Yes.
Michael?
Okay, yes, good afternoon or good evening or whatever it is where you are. I'm thankful to Xavier for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's my first encounter with IFSAM, so I'm kind of a newcomer to it. Very much appreciate the broad mission that Xavier laid out at the beginning. I'm thankful that I can come here just speaking for myself rather than for some institution or even for the management field generally. Xavier knows kind of the line I take on these matters. What I'd like to do is sort of just pick up on what Eric said and maybe add value to that rather than add a whole nother kind of line of discussion. One of the points being made, maybe perhaps the biggest general manifesto statement is that we need a paradigm shift in research in the management field, lest we both publish and perish, or whatever other harms are to befall us individually and collectively. There's a kind of allied with that, a notion of the good academic in the field of management, the good mature academic in the field of management. And here the reference was to the engaged scholar and to Andrew Van de Ven's engaged scholarship notion generally. I'm sure Xavier would like to speak to that. And a couple of other points, and one is on the diversity theme and the importance of having an appreciation for many, I don't know, varieties of research and many varieties of research objectives that go with it. So that's the everything is valued principle. And further, there was a suggestion that in accomplishing all of this, there's work to be done in overcoming a kind of duality or bifurcation or, you know, qualitative difference between the scientific and societal missions of management research. And I guess my question is, if how can we put that together? And are there certain difficulties or sort of wins or factors at work in the universe that work against making progress in these respects? And if so, are there any kind of countermeasures that we can adopt? Okay, so I'd say that the biggest thing here that I would have in mind is that if everything is valued, then it's a bit difficult to characterize the field as being a field. Okay, it's difficult, and if that's true, you know, it's really actually hard to value anything. If everything is valued, then it might be hard to value anything. And that could you know, work against the change that you say is in principle afoot and needs to be accelerated. And so what that's, I mean, the standard countermeasure to that is you have to have a counter framing of the field, one that is apt enough that it will bring about support, okay, even among the people who previously might have been allies for the hitherto dominant approach. And I don't find in the at least the vocabulary of paradigm shift, of everything is valued, the engaged scholar, et cetera, a powerful enough message that can work as a sort of countermeasure against the forces that work to protect the status quo. Now, I mean, I have my own ideas about what that should be, but I think the principles behind it are more important than the exemplification of the idea. And I can later share the idea if Xavier wants. And that is to do two things. One is to look in the past for statements by important people that have, in some sense, been motivated by the same set of concerns, okay, and that have gotten play, at least at certain points in the history of the field, and put them back into use, okay. Also appreciate what they were up against. Also appreciate what they thought they were up against in developing a message in favor of what they took to be the important paradigm shift. And later, because we don't want to just be mired in the past, we need to think about the kinds of incongruencies that we want to overcome, difficulties we want to overcome that are more specific to the present. So what I had in mind for the first thing is, as Xavier will know, Herbert Simon's ideas about, and he didn't have a good actual name for them, but the famous book was called Sciences of the Artificial, and deep in there, chapter 5 in particular, is a frame for professional disciplines where the counterframe is a scientific discipline pretending to be a professional discipline. And so he had to develop a counterframe. The counterframe, in a sense, was to develop the notion of a design-oriented professional discipline, as opposed to an institutionally oriented one like law or accounting, and exemplified by engineering and architecture and planning and things like this. So what's interesting about that, so I think we can borrow that idea, okay, of a counter notion of a discipline, a design-oriented professional discipline, and consider whether management as a whole or fields within it might pick up on that idea and make it part of its, not only the frame of its thinking, but its outward messaging to the world. And I don't think, while there's a lot of saluting to that idea, I don't think there's a lot of people who have picked up on it in a substantive way, as opposed to a kind of cosmetic way. In particular, I'd say, and certainly when it is being used as a term of art, like design science or something like that, it's not being used the way Simon meant it. And Simon was meant it to deal with a problem that we still have. And that is that we, among other things, two quite different traditions of professional education and professional research and professional practice, which we rarely acknowledge. And the history of it is more about a deliberative tradition that is associated with Harvard. And then there's a tradition of where the medical school model was emulated, and where Carnegie Institute of Technology was the historical sandbox. He was against the Carnegie thing, even though he was there, although he didn't embrace the historical alternative. So there was an attempt at transcendence, but not a particularly fulfilled one, at least in the management field, and partly because he went off and did other constructive things. But I think we might return to that idea, which was never fully worked out, and certainly never fully adopted as a outward vision and statement about the field, and draw a lot of implications from it. I would suggest that many of the specifics, a specific sort of bill of complaint and suggestions for the future that Eric discussed, can be placed inside that idea, and you can draw the dots, connect the dots within it. Okay, so and maybe some of these dualities, like between science and societal missions, will somehow dissolve if you think in these terms. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I'm delighted to see that in this webinar, maybe because it's a closing webinar, the three speakers so far have referred to each other. So I'm delighted to see that there is actually already a dialogue in the interventions of the panelists. Thank you so much. The next speaker, I'm really happy to see Professor Tomoki Sekiguchi, who managed to join us. I don't know if David, would you like to introduce Professor Sekiguchi, please?
Yes. Yes. Professor Tomoki Sekiguchi is the co-editor-in-chief of Applied Psychology, president of EAMSA, and vice president of AJBS. Professor Sekiguchi, welcome and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Welcome. I'm very sorry I'm late. I miscalculated the time differences. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, so again, my name is Tomoki Sekiguchi from Kyoto University, Japan. So today I represent one journal and two associations. So first of all, I'm a co-editor-in-chief in Applied Psychology and International Review. So this is the official journal of International Association of Japanese, Applied Psychology, the oldest international association of psychologists, which is founded in 1920. So this journal specifically focusing on publishing papers in psychological phenomena in the broad domain of work, organizational, and other applied settings. So impact factor in 2019 is 2.8. So we are experiencing a growing number of submissions. For example, so we have about 25% increases of submissions from 2019 to 2020. So from the editor's perspective, I observed that the publishing in a good journal is becoming more and more difficult in recent years. This is because the number of submissions is increasing for a limited spaces. So for example, in APIR, so we are only publishing high quality articles in terms of strong theoretical contributions and methodological rigor. I also observed that research is more labor intensive, especially because the high demands for a rigorous methodology. For example, many articles use one or more studies. And also the researchers make best efforts to collect data from multiple sources or different time points and also from different levels. I also observed that the review articles and meta-analysis articles are increasing, which suggests that the field is becoming mature and numerous studies have already available for aggregation and summarizing to draw meaningful conclusions. So in terms of the impact factor, it influences a lot. The quality of submissions to the journals is influenced by a factor when they are decided to which journal they are submitting their work. However, impact factor is not stable, as you may know, and is influenced by a small number of star articles that attract a lot of citations, especially for small journals like ours. And we believe that open access and open science are healthier and more desirable directions for the advancement of science. So APIR is gradually moving into these directions. And in terms of the evaluation of scientific work, I believe that peer review is essential for the evaluation of single studies. However, it is encouraged that the academic work will be interpreted with practical words, and then will be published in practical practice-oriented journals and business magazine and so on to stimulate debate, discussion with practitioners, also the evaluation by practitioners. So I also have a president of Euro-Asia Management Studies Association and the vice president of the Association of Japanese Business Studies. So Euro-Asia Management Studies Association, YAMSA, try to promote research and education in the field of business and management in Asia and Europe, with special emphasis on international comparisons. So we hold annual conferences alternately in Europe and Asia, bring together researchers and business executives who are discussing research and experiences, exchange ideas, and establish collaborative networks. So Japanese Association of Japanese Business Studies exclusively focusing on Japanese business systems and its economic, social, and cultural environment. So the annual conference was held right before the larger Academy of International Business meetings with same location. So both associations are relatively small, but have a common practices. So the papers presented at the conferences are considered as a candidate to be published as a special issue in Asian business and management. So from these associations' perspective, we seek balance between research and practice because one of the objectives of our association is to promote conversation and interaction between practitioners and academic researchers so that both parties can learn from each other. At the same time, we also emphasize the academic quality because we're publishing special issues at ABM based on the conference papers. So in short, pursuing both scientific rigor and relevance to the practice is quite challenging, but we want to do our best to promote them. Thank you very much.
Arigato, Tomoki. Thank you so much for your contribution. We really have endeavored hard to get you here, a representative of the Japanese scholarly community, and we are delighted that you could join us. As you know, JABA, the Japanese Academy of Business Administration, is a member of the Federation of IFSAM, and we obviously encourage all the different subfields of management studies to be, all the scholarly societies dealing with different subfields to join IFSAM. So thank you so much again for your reflections. And I guess we have still 5 speakers, 5 panelists to go for their initial intervention. So that's why I took the liberty to remind everyone through the chat that you are more than welcome to use the chat to ask your questions and make your comments, because it's also part of the conversation, the chat. That's the challenge, the multi-skilling, multi-channel world in which we live now in. And this will be recorded, and we will try to do our best to try to address them as we go forward. May I give the floor now to my co-chair, David, for the next speaker?
Yes, thank you very much, Xavier. The next speaker is Ella Rendez, and Ella is from Taylor and Francis Publishing Group. And I know Ella is publishing the Africa Journal of Management. And Ella, welcome, and take it over. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed all of the other panels. I'm trying to share my screen. There we are. I work for Taylor and Francis. TNF is a commercial academic publisher that has been active for more than 2 centuries. It was established in the UK, but now has 18 offices all over the world, including Cape Town, South Africa, which is where I'm based. You may well know us better as Routledge, because that is the imprint we most commonly use for the social sciences. We publish more than 2,700 journals, and we are committed to open research and open access, and are a signatory of DORA. We have a strong business and management portfolio, including 125 journals, many of which I imagine you would recognize, more than 9,000 books. However, my mandate is regional rather than subject specific. As a portfolio manager on the TNF Africa team, I work on a range of humanities and social sciences journals, spanning subjects including business and management, but also African studies, politics, and history. In this capacity, I work a lot on bridging regional inequalities and promoting research from the global south. TNF is actually the only one of the big 5 commercial publishers that has an editorial team in Southern Africa. We've had an office in South Africa for 15 years, and we currently publish 72 regional journals. We work extensively with local partners, and our aim is to give valuable contextualized regional research a global platform. Much valuable criticism of the existing ranking systems has already been given in these webinars. So I want to concentrate instead on the things I think we can agree on as the right direction of travel to get us to a more holistic and responsible research ecosystem. We keep coming back to a collective action problem, but actually there's been broad agreement amongst all stakeholders about certain things, and I would like to highlight those. First, I haven't heard anybody dispute the value of DORA and generally diversifying metric use and increasing transparency around journal operations. TNF has taken a step in this direction by adding an extended metric page for each journal, which you can see on the slide here. It includes usage, all of the traditional citation metrics, and also speed and acceptance rates so that authors have a better idea what to expect. What you can't see on the screenshot is the explanatory section underneath this, which breaks down how each metric is calculated, how they should and shouldn't be used, and also why certain journals may not have all of these metrics available. We can't suddenly just throw out dominant metrics like the impact factor, but we should be working to deprioritize impact factors by supplying a range of alternatives and educating the whole academic community about how each metric works and how they should be used. Part of diversifying metric use is also taking into account real-world article-level impact gauges like usage and altmetric scores. I have heard altmetrics mentioned a tad disparagingly in some of these sessions as being about how often something is mentioned on Twitter. Twitter is a powerful tool for the dissemination of research, but even if you have doubts about the value of social media in this regard, Altmetric, the donut, tracks things like news coverage and policy documents, which I'm sure we can agree is valuable. The example in this screenshot is getting a lot of attention in the news. You can see that is shown in red. Our TNF Africa team has a very rewarding partnership with the Conversation Africa to help highlight African research, which is valuable beyond a purely academic audience. We found that research featured on platforms of this sort increases in impact enormously, often being picked up by mainstream news sites like CNN. This kind of thing is integral to getting African research attention on a global stage, even if it is originally published in regional or niche journals, which would struggle to compete internationally if all we look at is impact factor. Journals that cater to practitioner or activist audiences often have high usage and high altmetric scores, but comparatively low citations. And that just means that these journals are impactful in a different way. Much has also been said in these panels about the dangers of a siloed, exclusionary, or narrow approach, which does a disservice to a subject area which is interdisciplinary in nature and which lends itself to contextualized research. In my personal role, I'm preoccupied with ensuring we have enough African voices represented on our editorial teams and boards, and ensuring that we increase the amount of African authors that we publish. An important aspect of this is working with early career researchers to make sure that they understand how the publishing systems work and to train them as future reviewers and future editors. On a related note, collaboration across geographies, cultures, institutions, subjects, and publishers is key to breaking down barriers. The main way that we remain relevant and engaged in an African publishing context is by partnering with local publishers. And of course, many of the journals are published on behalf of African societies and institutions. These collaborations are extremely important to understanding local values and challenges. Of course, collaborating is exactly what IFSAM is giving us all the opportunity to do. We do operate in a complex ecosystem, but conversations across stakeholders, regions, and subjects can go a long way to bridging divides. In summary, so long as we all work to diversify metric use and transparency around quality criteria, work towards diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of research production, and collaborate as much and as broadly as possible, I think we are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah, for your presentation, for the highlighting the contextualized perspective and for the kind words for the Federation. Thank you so much. I have now the distinct pleasure of introducing Tunji Adegbesan, who is an old friend of mine, an old colleague. It might not look like that, but we know each other already for maybe more than 20 years. Tunji did his PhD at IFSAM Business School in Barcelona, my hometown, and he went to be a professor and director of the Center for Competitiveness at the Lagos Business School in Nigeria. And he decided later on to quit academia, at least for a while, who knows, and become an entrepreneur. And he is the founder and CEO of DD Mobile. Tunji, it's a pleasure seeing you again. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. Pleasure. I'm very grateful for the invitation. I'm going to try to keep to the 6 minutes. And yeah, so I consider myself sort of a lapsed academic, or let's say an academic on leave, not a permanently exited one. I'll be back. And the reason for that is actually, I think, related to what I want to talk about. I'll talk about something related to the questions on open access and on trends in academia. And fundamentally, my view on this discussion is that maybe and I don't know how to do this, but probably we need to have some deeper consensus on the missions of our profession. So as management academics or scholars, vis-a-vis the mission of the institutions that employ us, the universities or the business schools, because I feel there's not always a sync, there's a disconnect there. And it's a bit like in a hospital where you have doctors who identify as doctors, nurses who identify as nurses, and yet they're all employees of this medical institution, and everybody has to work together for the service of the patient. You know, well, so we have a business school that may employ people and may or may not be beholden to the management profession or to the national regulators, and then also employs academics who who seek institutional advancement at their place of work, as well as career advancement in their career. And when these things don't sync well, it leads to some issues. So I feel one issue sometimes is there's a disconnect between the mission of the institution, which is employer, and also a social institution and a social stakeholder. Then the academic, who is employee and has an institutional career path or career paths, as well as member of a professional body, professional career with colleagues and around the world. Because I would argue that the journals, the articles, these metrics are just measures. And we're always going to have a conflict or disagreement around the relevance and validity of the measures if there is no sync around what they are measuring. So they're going to for an institution that identifies and says, what we do here is, so to speak, generate arcane research, so that we have the indirect respect that enables us to achieve other goals, then that institution is going to foster outlets and hire people that drive that. And then it would be, for me to argue to that institution that that's not what that institution ought to be doing, I would therein be challenging what that institution has set as its own goal. Whereas some other institution may say, oh, I'm, for example, in this African nation, and I feel, obliged to these people to help them develop, and then therefore I'm going to favor this kind of work and favor this kind of employees and favor this kind of output. And then if someone else were to say to that institution, no, you need to develop or foster this kind of academic research, I would therein be challenging the way that institution identifies and what it's for. So we're always going to have some issues around these outputs and metrics without thinking about what they're trying to measure, what the research is for in the first place, which would then lead to the evaluation of the research. What it's for is going to be what's going to drive, and we may not have consensus around what it's for, so it's definitely clear that we will therein not have consensus around how to measure it. And I have a personal context to that because I spent 14 years at a business school, as Xavi mentioned, which leading business school in Africa's largest economy. And as across a lot of Africa, there's poverty all around you. So you cater to the leaders of the multinationals and you grow them. But it's very easy for institutions in that kind of environment to feel this social need to not just make the CEOs of multinationals happy, but you see poverty all around you and you think, what is business knowledge for? Can business knowledge be used to generate wealth and drive? And then you are like, perhaps we're not so focused on finding new knowledge. Perhaps we need to get this old proven knowledge to as many small SMEs as possible so that they can grow. And maybe they don't even know the good old stuff, whereas the bigger institutions want the new stuff. And then so we had a situation there where we had what was called the faculty tripod. And the faculty had to dedicate at least 30% of their time across academic research, teaching, and what was known as industry engagement. And so we try to struggle with this kind of thing. And personally, I was educated in a background that was very much into the traditional academic research mode. So I always felt very comfortable in that and in publishing, in trying to publish in top journals. But then living in this context, you do see also, okay, what are we going to do about this society? Does the business school have any obligation to this society at all? And because I was in leadership, we used to have these discussions all the time. And this led me down one path, which led to what I do now, which is trying to scale and bring management education to micro SMEs. So what have we learned about academia, about research that is useful for a lady who is bringing up 4 children and she has a little enterprise with just 1 employee? How do M&As and diversification and leadership and hiring apply there? And I would like to say that I have found that counterintuitively, a lot of what we do actually is relevant there, but maybe we don't have a lot of incentives or time to spend to try to do that translation. But I was forced to find myself in that world, and when doing the translation, I probably didn't expect otherwise, but a lot of what we do actually is relevant there. But if I'm in an institution that doesn't really incentivize that translation, then I won't do it. If I am in a society where my progress in the career is measured by some other things, then I won't do it. And so my summary suggestion is that maybe we need to bring more the word service into how we define what we're for. So what are our institutions and our employers for? Who are they there to serve? We as a career, we as academics, who are we here to serve? Because I feel that if we have service as a kind of umbrella, then everything fits in. There is work to discover novel things, which is a good service for some types of institutions and a good service for the rest of us as academics. There is work to test what has already been known, which is also a type of service. There is work to simply disseminate what we already know to those who don't yet know it, which is another form of service. There is work to create tools for the academics, and you do that work, and it seems like some arcane research, but helps the academics do their work. It creates tools. There's also work to create tools for the practitioners. And for me, all work fits in if it's serving in some way or the other. So as part of our institutional and professional missions. So in summary, I find that, and I don't know the answer, this discussion around what we're for would shed light on how we measure what we do, because what we do is for what we're for. On a parting note from the pandemic, one thing I've found, and this is me thinking of Africa, and we also do some work in South Asia and India, is that I think the pandemic may hasten the, so to speak, democratization of management knowledge. If you look at the evolution of business schools and who we've been teaching big corporations, we've been teaching young MBAs, but then you have these nations where we need to create, Nigeria needs to create 15 million jobs in the next 5 years. India needs to create 230 million jobs. And which academic discipline is closest to this job creation in management of enterprises? It's probably us. And with the pandemic, there's been a growth in digital readiness in a lot of the developing world. So new models may enable us at this time to disseminate some of that knowledge and research, and maybe also help with the relevance. Because if I'm in an environment where there are few people to use that knowledge in that way, then I may be challenged on the relevance. So that's just a parting shot on a trend I find. But I'm happy we're having this discussion, and I think, yeah, it leads us to this discussion around who we are and what we're for, because I think what we should be measuring flows from there. And we probably may not have one answer. We may have multiple things we are for, and if we have a big tent where we can all be respected for being for different things, pursuing different things, and being measured in that regard, then maybe that is some sort of progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sunji. Muchas gracias. I think you very eloquently put forward your point of view and summarize them again. So, David, I don't want to take, it's now your turn. So, of course, it's Bayan Thiem coming up, and I'm tempted to introduce her, but please go ahead, David.
You can go ahead, introduce her, please.
Well, so it's again my distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce Bayan Thiem, who comes originally from Senegal, right? And who did her PhD in information systems in France, in Paris, and has had a extensive and successful career as a top manager both at Bouygues and at Philip Morris International in the areas of production, facility management, as well as HR management and change management. And surprise, she's decided several years ago to become a full-time consultant on change management and strategy. Bayan, the floor is yours as our representative consultant today in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier. Thank you for really the brilliant, inspiring, and insightful conversation throughout this cycle of webinars. And I'm really honored to be and humbled to be here with you because I'm not in the field of research anymore. I'm indeed a change management practitioner. I started from a background in academia and more than 20 years leading all sorts of large and international business units. And what I do now is I help business managers to succeed their transformation, literally helping them to connect people, processes, and technology into a systemic and integrative change journey. So in these pandemic times, I've experienced a wider offer of webinars to access to knowledge at large, not only from research, but from big consulting firms and many other bodies on all kinds of topics. I find it much more diverse and inclusive in terms of inclusion and diversity of thoughts, which is echoing a little bit what I see with my business customers who are focused, among other things, at building what they call learning organizations. And they're really coming up with this platform, with this knowledge platform, supported by technology, fed with internal and external content, featuring access anytime, anywhere, bringing structured and unstructured content, instant measurements to adjust to the learning experience and to the difference within people, and so on and so forth. And that's why, to the question of open science, I believe in open science and in open access, because in my view, it's about focusing on the content rather than on the container, instead of restricting knowledge and insights to an elite. For example, I do have a knowledge bank with hundreds of method, processes, and tools, a mix of research, experiment, and experience. But I generate my revenue by helping organizations to operationalize the content. And I'm giving them open and free access to the change management knowledge itself. Because to me, the value comes from translating insights and ideas into impact for the business and the society. And therefore, again, to me, knowledge is no longer power because the world is connected. To me, power rather comes from what you do with it to generate value for business and for society. So I've been scanning through the summary. Thank you, Xavier, great job. I've been scanning through the summary of the previous webinars, and I understand the complexity and difficulty to come up with metrics to address the multidimensional problem of measuring scientific management publications. To me, the issue requires a profound transformation involving people, processes, and technology. And I was thinking, one might learn from the business world on how they lead such transformation. So I don't know if we should switch away from journal impact factors to measure scientific quality. But what I do know in my world of managerial practitioner is that quality starts from the audience, from the customer, looking into the pains and the gains of the different audiences in defining an outcome-based matrix to help them solving their problems or fulfilling their expectations. I have an obsession for customer centricity. I have an obsession for the exam questions, which is the so what, what's in there for me. And that's why, with my lens of managerial practitioner, I'd measure quality with 3 words: pragmatic, time, operationalized. pragmatic in addressing the current managerial issues. And one of them, the one issue at the moment I'm seeing across the board of all the organizations I'm working with is how to lead organizations in a hybrid environment. Time needed to consume knowledge, because managers have little span of attention in regards of the heavy operational agenda they do have. And my favorite one is operationalize. How do you land the research in the business world? How do you translate findings and insights into actions on the ground? What's in there for me to answer to my managerial questions? And that's why I believe quality of publications should be segmented by audiences, and those audiences should be involved in co-creating the solutions. And instead of surveying them, that's why echoing what Eric was saying, I'd suggest to connect them, to connect with them and to connect for them in order to co-design the solution to create greater impact for business and society. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bayan. Really appreciate it. So I guess I think we are converging already in some points, and I was just trying to think about how to put that in a synthetic way. It seems to me that several panelists, just a point of synthesis, partial intermediate synthesis before we listen to the last set of panelists, is that Eric, Lou, Andrew in the chat, Andrew Jack from the FT, and Bayan right now, to some extent Tomoki also, about the balance and interaction between researchers and practitioners. There is the issue of, and I guess what Tunji was referring to, what are we for? And so if our mission is to cater, to serve some societal need through the knowledge that we generate. So of course we are into knowledge generation and diffusion, as also Tunji was putting forward. But management research is the generation, the creation of new knowledge. The way we have been talking about it through the webinar series. I guess the issue is how much, or should all management research, any research project, have a societal goal in mind that it's going to be serving? Very much in line, I guess, with what Andy van de Ven mentioned in the encapsulated, or trying to encapsulate in the adjective engaged scholarship, in that engagement with other stakeholders of the society. And this is something that we have seen to in many places, trying to link management research with sustainable development goals. We could now discuss whether that listing of goals is actually actionable and operationable. But I've seen that trend. And this actually, I think, is also touching on the point that Andrew mentioned in the chat, which is the degree of autonomy of management research, of management scholars in undertaking their research. And it seemed to me that Andrew was calling for less autonomy, so that we cannot so freely define our agenda, but that in some way, because we would be dependent on money coming from some stakeholders, the money that Eric was referring to, that then we should be more accountable to those funding our research and hence serving their needs. So that seems to be a theme that emerges from some of the panelists. And I think that Michael Barzilai was trying to tell us some ways of how this actually might have been thought before, and how others in the past might have tried to come up with principles or ideas about how to make it actually work, how to actually change, right? Going back to Bayan, how to actually change, or in the new fashionable word, transform, which I don't like, how to change the system, the scholarly system, to make it more accountable to the rest of society. And he was referring, Michael, to Herbert Simon conceptualization of design sciences, and maybe we can hear more from him on that. So I think that was a very practical, in a way, pragmatic approach from Michael to tell us, well, there might have been others like Herbert Simon, who many years ago, many decades ago, already thought about this and had some ideas of how we could change to work, as Michael said, against the obstacles of perpetuating the status quo. But I just wanted to maybe give as I said, an intermediate summary or synthesis of some of the issues that have been raised. So we now can listen to the few, I think the last three speakers. So David, if I may turn back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Xavier. The next speaker is Andrew Jack, and Andrew Jack is from the Financial Times Global Education, and he is the editor of that. And Andrew, thank you very much for being present, and the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm sorry I'm a bit in the shade here, squatting in a cafe at the moment, but it's great to attend this event. Really interesting discussions, and all credit to IFSAM and the other organizations here for trying to engage in these really important reflections. I think I echo many of the points that have been made so far. It does seem to me that in academia in general, and nowhere more than in business schools, research should be applied, practical, relevant to societal objectives. And I think it seems to me there ought to be a way to combine that practical implementation and relevance message with the criteria even around acceptance into leading academic journals, as well as thinking about the wider role of business schools in training and outreach. Now, we all recognize there are limitations to rankings, and I fully accept that. Our rankings only include in part an aspect around research. They also reflect many other forms of the activities and output of business schools, which are essential. So while there's a need to reflect on how to measure academic research, I think there's also a responsibility on business school leaderships to not also simply focus on those inevitably reductive metrics. You know, they shouldn't be driven by their criteria for recruitment and promotion of faculty, for example, simply by bibliometrics. They should think about wider factors. That's one reason why we've tried to introduce also a wider range of metrics and reporting, and more qualitative measures, including efforts to try to call on business schools to submit best practice examples they have of research, of operations management, of most recently teaching around things like sustainable finance, something that we're working on currently. And I think these qualitative measures are useful in terms of individual faculties' decisions and showcasing wider ranges of output. But all that said, I think research itself is important, and looking at factors including citations and high quality impact publications are part of that debate. I think we need to think more about interdisciplinary research around, as we've heard earlier, commitments to open publication and open science and replicability of research that's published. We need to think about other forms of academic output, books, chapters, case studies, intellectual property, engagement with policy and practice, as well as simply academic articles. And as I've said, I think there is an issue around accountability that needs addressing. The fact is, most funding, whether from companies or governments or other external bodies, doesn't typically go to business schools. You know, it goes to engineering, it goes to science, it goes to medicine, for example. And maybe there is a need for more active engagement and cultivation of those forms of external partnership and funding as part of the process to drive accountability and value in what research is taking place. In any case, I look forward to further discussion and insights around this. I very much welcome not just the critiques that are very valid and helpful, but tangible alternative proposals of how we and others could measure the widest possible range of factors that capture valuable academic output. And I think that requires collaborative work. It requires thinking about new standards of measurement and collaborative approaches. And indeed, I'm at the moment working with the RRBM, amongst others, on the idea of a sort of slow hackathon, if you like, that would actually encourage different groups, whether journals, research bodies, business school academics, data experts, librarians, and others to come forward with ideas either from their own data or from combinations with other forms of metrics to try to put forward more meaningful assessments of the full range of academic output, not only for rigor, but also for relevance and resonance or reach to an audience far beyond that of other academics. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We truly appreciate your engagement with us since the first webinar in January, and the work together also for the conversation letters and today's presence and contribution. If I may, before introducing the last panelists of today's webinar, two reflections which come to mind triggered by Andrew's points. The first one is also bringing back one of the panelists' positioning points in the last webinar with government representatives. And I'm speaking about Professor Gerd Gigerenzer, emeritus psychologist in Germany, a member of the Scientific Council of the European Research Center, the agency that the European Union has for the funding of basic research. And we had a very interesting after the webinar conversation with Professor Gigerenzer around the meaning or understanding of the notion of basic research versus applied research. And because Andrew Wright claimed that management research should be applied. And Professor Gigerenzer made the point that the ERC funds only basic research. And so I wanted to understand whether he thus thinks that management belongs to, or management research belongs to basic research. And he thought so, but only in one dimension. And I think that that's part of the problem. Because as you all know, there is some part, I couldn't really right now quantify it, but a substantial part of management research, which is trying to understand, to explain behavior and effects of that behavior of organizations without necessarily having in mind interventions within those organizations, or let's say, practices that can be actually carried out within the organization. And I think that that's the kind of, that's Gigerenzer's conceptualization of basic research. However, because in my mind, I would argue that all management research is applied research already. The thing though is that part of it is to try to understand without, as I said, necessarily examining the consequences of actionable actions, let's say, to a bit redundant. For instance, I'll give an example. There is a lot of research on the diversity of individuals within teams, within organizations, and its effects. Well, managers can change somewhat the composition of an organization, but it's extremely rare, right, that managers can completely overhaul, right, the composition of their teams immediately, right away, right? So this research on the diversity effects, on the effects of diversity, it's very interesting, but it might not be fully actionable. In contrast, there is research, for instance, on the use of incentives, of variable compensation, of bonuses or stock options. And that is probably more immediately actionable, right? If we find that they are good or bad, right? So I think that part of the problem is indeed in the vocabulary that we use and what we think as basic versus applied. The other point that I wanted to raise very quickly is that, because that's one of the things that we have come to realize at the IFSAM General Assembly. Andrew, you spoke about different forms of academic outputs, and we came to realize that there is one form which is rarely actually valued as it should, we believe, which are textbooks. We come to realize that textbooks are the heroic engagement of some of our colleagues who might be remunerated by publishers, but lately very little in terms of percentage, right, of copyrights. A heroic effort to synthesize all that we have found through research in a given domain to be communicated, diffused, shared through our teaching to the new communities of new cohorts of managers. And so probably textbooks should be considered as part of research, because it's already in itself a creative synthesis, organized structure, and integrated synthesis of the existing research, and then to be transmitted. So that's just one point on other academic forms that I think would be very important to consider. And last but not least, let me give the floor to Professor Marie-Laure Salle, who is currently the Director General of the Graduate Institute for International Affairs in Geneva, former Dean of the Sciences Po, Political Science School in Management and Innovation in Paris, Vice President of the European Institute for the Advancement of Studies in Management, and board member of the European Group of Organizational Studies. Marie-Laure, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Javier, and thank you to all. And it's a pleasure to be here to share a few thoughts together with you. Well, you know, when Javier asked me to come today, I was like, gosh, this seems like a world away for me, the world of management research, because I've made a big jump, and it's only 8 months, but I feel like it's been a big jump. So what should I say? What can I say? First, I will say a few words about the Graduate Institute. The Graduate Institute is a social science university. It's not at all a business school. It's a social science university that has a number of specificities. First, it's a social science university with a focus on international issues, international, global, transnational issues. So all the research we do has an international, global, transnational perspective, and you'll see how important it is to the rest of my few words. It is also, and it's important to know that from the start, a very transdisciplinary institute. From the very beginning, from its very origins in 1927, this has been a place where lawyers worked with economists, with sociologists, and progressively anthropologists. Historians also have been very present in the school, philosophers, and this has been really a very long tradition, this transdisciplinary perspective. And another element which I think is important to know where I'm speaking from is that from the beginning, the school has been an engaged scholarship school, in the sense that William Rappard, who created the institute at the beginning in 1927 with the objective of, in a sense, creating a school that would research and also teach for a new generation of international civil servants to some extent, people who would actually be working for the new League of Nations and all the international organizations that were starting to emerge then. William Rappert himself was very involved as an actor, as an engaged scholar on the one hand, but also actor in the construction of the League of Nations and of the international world that was then emerging. So this is really something that is in our DNA, I would say, this close connection between research on the one hand and engagement in real issues, real organizational developments, and that materializes in particular by very close set of links we have with all international organizations, which obviously are very, very strongly located in Geneva, and that really makes us a very powerful ecosystem also of engagement with big issues. So ultimately, this also means that our interest for, on the one hand, international affairs and development issues on the other has made us actually very strongly focused on an SDG, to make it simple. So SDG is really at the core of the school, which by definition makes us a school where societal relevance is really at the heart of the DNA. So there's really, and so when I came to the school, some of you know me from before, from my years in the business school world, knew that when I was in the business school world, and Javier, you didn't mention that before, Sciences Po, I was at ESSEC, which was very classical business school, and where I was dean of faculty for many years, etc. And so throughout, I would say, the last 15 years, I was extremely, let's say, frustrated, that would be the right word, or and very much on the lines that Eric, Michael, and a few others have pushed forward the idea that we really need a paradigm change. And this is something that I have been hammering along for many, many years. Some of you probably remember this, and I won't go into this because it has all been very nicely said. And then I crossed the frontier, moved to Geneva, and now, have no problem anymore, in a sense, which is actually quite amazing. And so I'm not gonna, maybe what I want to do is from where I am and from what the Institute is doing, just a few lines of things that I think can be looked at from the business school world perspective. First, I want to go back to the metrics and to the form of research output. One thing that is very clear at the Institute is that, a few years ago, people were saying that the Institute was late in adopting a metrics-based research policy, etc. To some degree, this lateness makes it that we are actually advanced now. And I'm trying to explain this. The metrics dimension is very limited in its impact, both in the way in which we recruit and in the way in which we advance the career of colleagues. What is very fascinating is the way in which, particularly with respect to career advancement, the evaluation process is really a very qualitative evaluation process. And one of the strengths of this very qualitative evaluation of research is that actually colleagues read each other's work, including colleagues from other departments. They really read each other's work, which actually triggers and kind of facilitates interdisciplinarity. So there's really a virtuous circle here in having a process where the engagement is really with the qualitative dimension of research. Or same thing when you hire people, you really read what people are working on, and everybody reads what people are working on when they join us. And so you know what people are working on. Some of the frustration I've had in business school context was that we didn't know what people were working on. We knew their different impact factors, indexes, etc., but very rarely did we really know what people were working on, and this was extremely frustrating. So this is a first thing that I think it has a lot of virtue. Going back to basics, in a sense, really, what are we talking about? What are we writing on? And the excitement of ideas, which then generates actually engagement with each other, and therefore moves us towards the transdisciplinarity that we know we need, and clearly that we need in the business school context. Another thing that I would like to underscore, which is something that was extremely frustrating for me when I was in the business school world, and obviously is much less frustrating since I joined the Institute, is the multi-level dimension of research, which connects with the contextualization capacity. And, you know, there was this discussion about relevance means applied knowledge. Well, I beg to differ, maybe sometimes, but I think today in the world in which we live and the complexity of the world in which we live, I think that giving managers also the capacity to ask big questions like what is business for? And I think this was TJ asking that, and some of you asking it too. What is the political role of the firm? What are actually the societal implications of the business decisions that we're making? They're not just you know, intellectual questions. They're actually very practical questions for all of us. And having this contextualized backdrop, big question, big picture kind of input is definitely something that I was strongly frustrated with in the, you know, business school, management school research context. So this has changed. This is changing and this is improving significantly. But I think that there's a lot of this being done in social science universities like the Institute and many others. And I think that to that extent, expanding the connections with this kind of research and actually really opening up the intellectual boundaries of business school world is really, it's really about relevance, and it's really about the future, the sustainability of management research, I would really argue. Another thing that I take from the experience here at the Institute and is really this fluid interaction between critical thinking and engaged research, I would call it, or constructive, what we call constructive projection. And this is not an easy balance because on the one hand, critical thinking is about opening black boxes, you know, and for the business school world, this would be about opening the black boxes of our theories and their impacts of the theories of management research and the impact of those theories, the performative impact of those theories on some of the problems of the world. I mean, you know, thinking obviously about finance, but not only, there are many other, you know, performativity implications of management research that some people are really going after. One of the risks of doing only this critical thinking work is that you see it in the UK, you know, a number of universities. I won't mention this, but there's really now a kind of, you know, a discrimination, I would say, against critical management research in a number of business schools. And one of the risks is that, you know, there's really a kind of something bumping with the funding of business school at some point in one way or another. So that's really a problem. So how do you reconcile critical thinking, which I still maintain is extremely necessary, with constructive projection and engaged scholarship? And here again, I think that what I've seen at the Institute is a very, you know, interesting and intelligent ways of doing the two things, which is not, you know, really not giving up on the critical thinking dimension, but also being very close to the actors on the field to, at the same time that we're opening the black boxes, also, you know, putting forward solutions, constructing solutions for a number of issues that need those solutions. So I think that this is really, it's a delicate balance. But I think this is really something that needs to be pushed in the business school context, because in the business school context, it seems to me we are either on one side or on the other, but the two really don't get together. And I think that this is really going to be one of the important ways in which management research can remain relevant in the future. I guess I mean, maybe a last point is really reinforcing this point about the systemic dimension, which obviously is very counter-intuitive to management research, which has for the last 50 years tended to go more and more towards very positivist, you know, sub-disciplinary focus, narrow focus, digging deep rather than expanding large with big questions. And I think that the COVID has only made this more obvious, but it was there before COVID, that we need to understand the interdependencies of issues, interdependencies of questions, and the interdependencies of solutions and of actors in the moving up towards solutions. And thinking big in that way is obviously another definition of science, which has been marginalized in the business school context, because it's not very positivist. It's really kind of an older understanding of scientific perspective, which needs to be brought back and needs to come with, you know, certain ways of indeed recognizing the value of that kinds of perspective. And this, I think, is really going to be an important development. Another last point maybe that I want to underscore is when I arrived at the Institute, what I found also is a lot of engagement with arts, as a form of expression, as a complementary form of expression. Some of our students can do their master thesis, not yet the PhD thesis, but the master thesis in the form of videos or films, etc. And this is fine. This is being, you know, totally accepted. And I'm actually launching a major initiative to reinforce this complementarity of ways of expressing ourselves. And that's again something that I was highly frustrated with in the business school world. I think our research doesn't talk to the hearts. It doesn't talk to the souls. You know, I can't put myself, sorry to say that, but I can't put myself to read any business school, management school journals anymore. It was already difficult a few years ago, but now I can't, you know, this is impossible. So we have to find ways to combine research and ways of expressing research in ways that are touching people, everybody, ourselves included. And so I think this is really also something that deserves to be thought. I mean, there's been a lot of connection between management schools and engineering schools and technology. And that's great. And that's also something we're doing at the Institute. But I think beyond technology and management and engineering, I think the art part and the art in the sense of ART and art in the sense of HEART have to be brought back into management research. And I'll stop here.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Laure. Even though you might see yourself as an outsider to the management community these days, I think that the several disciplines that you mentioned underpinning the work of the Graduate Institute are also the disciplines that underpin management research, whether it's economics, sociology, psychology, law, political science, and even philosophy and history. So I think we still share the same underlying social disciplines. I think that I would like to make 2 points with your very rich contribution to this discussion, and before we open the floor for the next 20 minutes or so until the end of this session. I would like to highlight the term that you used to describe you know, one of the axes of the Institute on constructive projection, and in particular, co-constructing solutions. And I think that this actually is very germane to Herbert Simon design sciences, and probably Michael can tell us more about it. But what I have also heard and read, Professor Anna Grandori from Bocconi University argue that we need to engage in designing new solutions, in imagining new solutions, and not only studying the effectiveness of existing practices. So I think that we might be there in good hands if indeed we went back and revisited, as Michael has done, Herbert Simon, and maybe completed his project. And Michael might be able to tell us a bit more about that shortly. The second point that I wanted to emphasize is one of your last points regarding depth versus breadth. And I couldn't agree more with your statement there. I think, and this links with Eric's points on the capital critical importance of doctoral programs, in which EFMD has launched very recently 2 new accreditations. And I'm really interested and concerned at the same time about the impact that these accreditations might have in the field. But I consider, despite of being just 51, I consider myself the one of the last people who got educated in the US in a PhD program where I did write a monograph. I graduated in 2002. In 18 years, in less than 18 years, there's been a swiping institutional change in our field. There are no longer, in most parts of the world, monographs. Everyone is compelled to do a 3-paper dissertation. So to have things actually even published before graduating. Nowadays, for the top schools, 2A publications to be hired, and some PhD programs even require their students to have published before defending, which it's, in my mind, a total perversion of the university system and the PhD program. So I do think indeed that the monographs, and maybe without, not necessarily positivistic, but maybe also positivistic, indeed the monographs allow for a more holistic, integrative treatment of a research question in a more scholarly way, and not just in this productivist way or Stajanovist way even of cranking out papers before even you finish the PhD program. I think that this is fundamental. So I guess that we are in agreement in many things. Now, the thing is, how do we manage to change the system, which, as I said, in less than 20 years has radically changed and is, I would say, despite our concerns and the ones that the responsible research in business and management community has been raising, as Eric said, for the last 10 years already, I see this paradigm, the existing paradigm, further being diffused through the important role of many central and powerful actors across the rest of the world. So now we have it not only in Europe, but also in parts of Asia and the Middle East and Africa. So I would now open the floor, I guess, and David, please feel free to interject and help me out with the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Michael, your hand is up. Michael Basley, please. Am I right?
Well, it was just my clapping hand, really, rather.
Oh, I see. Okay, I thought I didn't see that this. I saw that this one, so that's why. Okay, thank you.
I could say something, but
yes,
that's what.
Feel free. Yes.
So just so many things to pick up on here. I mean, well, I think one thing that I'm kind of looking for, things that haven't been in the conversation that are sort of connecting dots, if you wish. And one I haven't heard is the connection between what's called research and teaching. I mean, we've heard connection between, I mean, the only connection we've heard about is sort of through textbooks. But it seems to me that if you have a, I don't know, I'll call it a specific, it's not quite the right word, but a specific idea of what teaching in a professional school concerned with management ought to be, well, then that will have implications for some aspects of research. And given that the teaching mission is got a lot of legitimacy to it, as well as being important sort of financially to institutions, that is a place to stand, okay? And if and you might think that the requirements to be met by research effort broadly defined ought to come from the idea you have about how to do teaching. So I think that's like maybe a little bit easier road to hoe than going directly to some idea of how we're going to be relevant to practice through the service mission. I mean, I agree that the service mission is important, but I think we're sort of standing a little too hard on that at the moment. If your concern is with, you know, the kind of change that Xavier is suggesting, I think Marie-Laure had some good ideas there about what the, you know, what teaching should be about. In particular, you know, some of the notions about being reflective and unpacking arguments that have kind of gone stale and become opaque and generated their performativity effects and so on and so forth. I mean, that's what I've been trying to do, is completely redefine what the teaching mission is. And that has implications for what you would do in research. You could see how that would play out. We're happy to come back to it. I do want to pick up on one small, another sort of blind spot point, okay, in the conversation. And it relates to what Xavier was sort of saying. So I think this idea that when you are studying practice, your objective is to generalize about what works, okay? That idea is baloney, okay, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they may construct some ideas that are useful. Everything could be useful in the future. But if one thinks to these design professions, they don't think like that, okay? It's medicine thinks like that. But the design professions don't think like that. They actually think that there's a certain, if you wish, uniqueness, not the right word, but it'll work for us, a uniqueness about any solution, so-called solution. Anything that works depends on the specificities of your teleology for that particular project, and it depends on the site and the situation in which it's found, right? That doesn't mean you can't study that particular thing and say something about it that could be meaningful to people in other places. Okay, indeed, the design professions spend a lot of time figuring out how to do that, particularly for their teaching, but not exclusively for their teaching. But there's almost nothing in our research traditions that suggests that we ought to be working out in individual cases what worked and writing it up in a way that will make that particular experience meaningful to people in other places. It's not the same, doesn't happen, but when it happens, there's no sort of meta theory about what people are doing with it. So it's harder to get published and harder to appreciate what it is. And on the Herbert Simon point, this was a blind spot for him. I mean, in chapter 1 of Science is the Artificial, he says, you know, don't reinvent the wheel, go figure out how things work. But when he comes to his chapter 5 discussion of design-oriented professional disciplines and the importance of developing domain knowledge and so on and so forth, it vanishes. It's not there. It's not hooked up. And there is no discussion whatsoever about how you would, now to use a reverse engineering term, recover the design in some case that's interesting. And I try to do that, but you have to go back to old vocabulary from more deliberative traditions to do it. You have to use social science in a more narrow way than the way it is usually done or said it's being done. And there is no language and no standardized skills for doing it. It's a huge blind spot, but it seems to me worth overcoming. Design recovery, that's the term you should write down.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Michael. That's very interesting on the uniqueness of solutions and what we tend to discuss in our articles about the generalizability of our findings and the boundary conditions to other times, territories, and cultures. There have been a lot of contributions in the chat, which we will recover and put forward in our summary. We have still 10 minutes of our time, and we have in the audience many interesting members of the community. And please don't take this as any negative implication for anyone. But I was wondering, I know one of them pretty well, who is Professor Romain Lofer, and who has thought about management in many sectors, including the public sector, the governmental sector. I don't know, Romain, if you would like to share your thinking about our conversation at this point.
Thank you very much. It's not an easy task because many things were said and many things were extremely interesting, and to know where you go. So from there, thank you very much anyway for the introduction, although it's a trap. And now I have to say something. Maybe one thing I would say is that the very notion of management and the very possibility of theorizing management is important. We have, Professor Basile was speaking about Herbert Simon. I was thinking about, and I'm thinking sometimes about another British writer, which is extraordinary, which is Lyndall Hervik. You know Lyndall Hervik? Lieutenant Colonel Hervik. Well, he has written. He was in Geneva, by the way. He was the head. He worked with Roundtree, and then he went to Geneva. He was in the consulting branch linked to the ILO. I don't remember the name of it. For 10 years, he fought like hell, and he was thrown out, of course. But and is an extreme. So you see, it's very strange that he's not known. So maybe my contribution would say is to say there is somebody called Urwick, U-R-W-I-C-K. He's a lieutenant colonel of the British Army. That's why he never did a PhD, as he says. He was the head of the American Marketing Association, and for some while, and he has extremely short, extremely well written, and very topical theoretical point of view from the point of view on management. And so that would be a contribution in a way, because I see that this author, we are publishing a book on authors, and I said I would like to write on Hervik, and nobody wanted. So I insist that Hervik, maybe, given I had something to say, that would be it. And he is a very good theoretician. At the same time, he is a very great consultant. He had one of the biggest consulting firms, and he worked on consulting in Geneva. And again, he was very much connected to, by the way, he is the man who translated Fayol in English. He was extremely near from Mary Parker Follett. And he's an amazing person, but he had no time to write big things. So he wrote very small articles, which are extremely interesting and theoretical. At the same time, well, that's one thing. Second thing, I think it's possible to define management and to link management to law. There is a very strong relationship between management and law, in the sense that it has to do with speech. A lot of it, coordination, takes place in speech. We have to speak, and to convince people to act in a certain manner, that we have to devise a language which allow people, and it is singular, as you said. Like the lawyer, the judge, has to decide a single case, and he has to do it with a general framework. From that point of view, we are very near but we don't have a general framework, we would say. Well, we don't, but the lawyers don't have it anymore. So the link between law and management is that today, law is management, that you have soft law. And soft law is nothing else but taking the rules and norms of management within the law. So there is an intellectual, conceptual problem of knowing law, philosophy of law, history of the philosophy of law, and the link with the history of management. And the connection is extremely strong. It's a crisis. By the way, it's a crisis in law. It's also a crisis in management, and it's also a crisis of society. And so we haven't spoken a lot about crisis, but the notion, by the way, Simon writes it he says something very interesting in the Science of the Artificial. You know this sentence when he says, men are strange people. They hate what they do themselves. So what they do themselves is the artificial. And the artificial, he says, is connected to all the negative points. It's artificial, it's not natural. And he has a list of negative qualification for the artificial. But we are in the science of the artificial. So the question is why something which is despised has become so important and so overwhelming. Now we want to defend nature. That's ecology. So the triumph of which shows that there is a problem with the artificial. You see, all these things are in a way connected. So so I don't know. These are a few things, but and another thing is.
Sorry, Romain. So then, to your first point, what is then management? The language that allows, I mean, the coordination thanks to an existing language?
My definition, it's not my definition. It is Chester Barnard's definition. I mean, we have huge, wonderful authors. One of them is Chester Barnard. And I think we should study, like Simon, like Ulrich, Barnard so my definition is like that of Barnard. He says in the introduction, in the preface, management is a language. He says, I saw that people of different jobs and different activities were able to talk together with a certain number of small number of words, as soon as they didn't speak of the specific of their job. And he says that's for business, public administration, sport, church, and so on. It's that if you just read the preface to his book, what is with the forewords, it's absolutely wonderful. And what is the definition? My definition, which is actually his definition, is it's an administrative language. We are dealing with administration and bureaucracy, I think. That's one meaning, at least. And to have this, and you need three things to have a language, according to Charles Morris, which is a disciple from Perth, which is you need to have a syntax, a semantic, and a pragmatic dimension. So the syntax is just, in this language, the organization is subject of the action. So it's and that's near from law also. The judge decides, the firm sells. So who is acting? That's the first thing. The second thing is that the people who work think that the language is a good representation of the world. That's the semantic. We have to agree that it is a good representation of the world. And the last one, which is at the center of what we all discussed, is that we agree that if we obey the rule of this language, our interests, the interests of the organization and the interests of society are globally compatible. Now, these, according to in Barnardian terms, is the first one is the fiction of superior authority. Who is the subject of action? The organization, because there is a fiction of superior authority. The second thing about the agreement on the language is the difference between formal and informal. We have to accept the formal structure because otherwise we cannot cooperate. But we have a singular one. The fact that we accept the collective one is because we have inducement, and we accept this negotiation about our perception and the collective. And the last one is that if we obey the rule of the game, then our interests, the interests of society and the interest of the world, that's a social responsibility. And in Barnardian terms, it is a difference between efficacy and efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Romain. Unfortunately, we are now 1 minute over time, and of course, being very cognizant of people's time. Those of you who have to leave, please feel free. I would like to thank you all, thank the panelists in particular for their brilliant interventions and building on each other's and the dialogue. even though we had limited time for dialogue. We hope that we will continue this in other venues, and going forward, the General Assembly of the Federation has set up 3 sub-policy committees, one on research, another on pedagogy, education, and a third on practice. And hopefully you will be hearing from us from the new series of webinars and gatherings to continue these conversations, to hopefully try to make the field advance, progress, but at least reflect about the state of the field and how we could improve it. So thank you all. Merci beaucoup. Namaste. Cheers.
Thank you.